Here's a good question. Who do you think you are? 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 If you're like everybody else, then who you think you are slips into two basic camps. On the one side, you think that there's something that needs fixing. There's something not quite right. And this may show up with weird habits or addictions, large or small, or strange behaviors that you notice you have. Or you may find that you want to do something but you can't. You set your will in a direction, but somehow something else in you's just not having it. Or you may think, oh, I was traumatized in my childhood, and that was really terrible, and because of that, to this very day, I'm still traumatized. I'm not quite right. Or you might have had some other negative experience that you feel has indelibly made you into who you think you are. And you might think, oh, my parents, they didn't bring me up right. And consequently, my inner child is wounded and lives in a little box, and it's wounded. And then on the other side, if you're like everybody else, you will think you're special. You think you're special, that there is something about you that's better than everybody else. You're special. Could be you think you're specially empathic. A lot of people do. Or you might think you're specially spiritual. Or you might think you're specially clever. Or you might think you're specially creative. Or you might think you've got special healing powers. Or you might think you've got special knowledge. But this special puts you a cut above everybody else. And so one's life then, thinking that that's who I am, fluctuates between feeling not good enough and not quite right and feeling terribly special. And that's basically life inside the psychological self. And the psychological self is basically who you think you are. Given all that's happened, given who the past says you are, then you've processed all that, thinking that you're processing it from a place of genius and reality, but in fact, you're processing it from a very biased and unenlightened place. The truth is that there is something wonderful about you, that gift, that special that you have, that really is something. It's part of your uniqueness. But what you've done is you've taken a handful of it and brought it down onto the psychological level to balance out not being good enough. So it's kind of a psychological dynamic of being special on the one hand and not good enough on the other, and you use your gift to, not for what it's there for, but to balance out not being good enough. That's who you think you are. So from that point of view, when you meet someone who thinks they're really, really special, like what's his name, Andrew Tate, was saying, I am, of all the men in the world, I am the number one man. He said, in any aspect you care to name. He's cleverer than everybody else. He's fitter than everybody else. He's richer. He's got more girls. He's got more cars. When you find someone who thinks that they're super, super special, then very often the equal and opposite is true about them somewhere in their psychological self. That there's some sort of really not good enoughness or some deep wound. And that what motivates the special, the need to be special, is actually something dysfunctional and hidden deep within the unconscious mind. But who I think I am, is that who I am? Am I who I think I am? Is that who I am? Well, I really hope not. Because it's kind of schizophrenic, bouncing from the one hand of being kind of not quite right and wounded in some way to being super special on the other hand. Who would I be if I just put all of that down for a moment? Because that's really is a narrative, isn't it? It's the myth of my life. Yes, in chapter 3, my parents did this to me. They sent me away to boarding school. And from then onwards in the story, I'm fucked. But the thing is this, it's a narrative, it's a story, it's a myth you've created. You're not a mythical being, are you? You actually are, you're here. You exist. You're not a character in a story. You're something more real than that. Your idea of yourself fluctuates all the time. If it's a good, happy day and you're feeling good about yourself, you think you're super special, you think you're great, da-da-da-da-da. And then something goes wrong, you don't feel good, you eat the wrong food, you don't get enough sleep, you've got a hangover, whatever it is, and you've got this negative script going on about you, who you think you are. And who you think you are is fed to you by your internal dialogue, constantly telling you your value relative to other people, relative to you in the past, relative to your expectations in the future, constantly characterizing you. Isn't that so? 1 minute it's telling you you're the great I am, and the next minute it's telling you that you're, whatever. But is it true that I am who I think I am? I am the psychological self. All those wounding experiences that happened, well, there they are. They're all of my scars, and they're never going to go away. Is that true? Because where are you? I mean, really, where are you? The only place you always are is here. Right here now, listening to this video. Right? So only looking where you truly, actually, really are, only looking where you truly, actually, really are, does any of that exist? And the answer is no. It doesn't. You have to go out of this moment and go and dredge it all up again and reinvent it into this moment. Because it's not here. What is here is you as life, you as existence, you as awareness, you as the seer, You as the witness, that's here, always. And nothing that you've witnessed, no matter how traumatic, nothing that you've witnessed, thankfully, has made any impression upon you. And you can prove that for yourself by just stopping the storytelling for a moment, by stopping the chatter for a moment, by focusing. And what do you find then? Any moment you do that, you'll find the same thing. Just a beautiful awareness. Just an unfathomable sense of life, of wholeness, of completeness. You are behind your story. You are behind your thoughts. You are behind the narrator. The narrator isn't a servant of reality. The narrator is entirely biased. When you're feeling down, it's biased towards a negative story. When you're feeling up, it's biased towards a positive story. But they're both stories. And misery comes from thinking you are who you think you are. And you see people, and they got an idea of themselves. I mean, Andrew Tate is a good example because he's so extreme. He's got an idea of himself of being the number one and the best, right? And in order to maintain that, he has to get validation from others. He has to get millions of people to validate that idea he has of himself. But it's never actually enough, because it isn't true. How can there be a best when everyone's different? I am the best at being me. He is the best at being him. And what does it matter? Why is it important to be better than everybody else? Because we have this idea that if I'm better than everybody else, then my version of what a human is, or my version of what life is, that is proved correct just by numbers. But it isn't true, is it? There are many people, there are billions of people who believe things that are nonsense. It isn't by the number of people who believe it determines how true it is it? How about letting go of all of that? Even for a moment, you can see this in a moment. If you drop your story, good and bad, just drop it for a moment. What you will find, if you open up to it and let it become manifest, and become quiet to it, and focus into it, what you'll find is far more amazing than anything you could have thought up. When you're living in a mentally based reality, you could have 37 Bugattis and still be as miserable as sin. When you're living in a mentally based reality, you could be praying to Allah 5 times a day and still not feel any connection. When you're living in a mentally based reality, you could be having all the sex with all the top beautiful women in the world and still not feel satisfied. But if you can let what is be, satisfaction immediately starts to unfold. Contentment immediately starts to fill you up. open a moment and you start to fill for as long as you hold that moment open. But most of us, most of the time, are hijacked by our minds. We think we are the commentator. We think our thinking is the most valuable thing about us. And that is called ignorance. Because there's something more. Who do you think you are? Some people say, who do you think you are? Exactly. Whoever you think you are, that isn't who you are. But make no mistake, you are. Just not who you think you are.